Alright, welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are going to break down what I ate in a day, as well as its impact on my blood glucose levels. So for this video, I wore this continuous glucose monitor all day, had it on the day before. Obviously, I'm still wearing it now. And it monitors the amount of basically blood sugar in my system. Before we get into what I ate, it's important to talk about basically what is metabolic health and why is it important for endurance athletes. There are sort of two ends to metabolic health spectrum. You have metabolic syndrome, where you have a whole host of issues that can come up. And then you have metabolic flexibility, where you're able to tap into your internal carbohydrate, your glycogen stores, as well as your stored body fat, and use that as an efficient form of energy. When it comes to endurance sports, especially the longer that you go, when you're going from sort of half marathon out to Ironman, it becomes kind of a game of numbers on how efficiently you can burn fat while you're exercising. So then before we get into basically what I ate, just kind of a breakdown of more or less the science behind this. Super simple version. I'm obviously not a doctor, so take this with a grain of salt, but this is, in a nutshell, kind of what I'm looking at in this data. So when we eat, our body breaks down our food and turns it into its basically most simplest form of glucose. So glucose then it goes into our bloodstream. When we have a high level of glucose, a high level of blood sugar circulating throughout our body, then that signals to our pancreas to make more insulin. Insulin basically drives the glucose out of the bloodstream and into the muscle, the livers, or into body fat, to kind of store it for future use. So you can either use it or you can store it for later. So effectively what we're trying to do is trying to see how quickly our body can take that glucose out of the bloodstream and direct it to where it needs to go. When we have high levels of blood glucose for long periods of time, that can start to kind of wreak havoc all over our body with things like inflammation and all sorts of other problems. Again, not a doctor. What we care about from an endurance perspective is that we are able to efficiently use both forms of energy. And when we are having high levels of blood glucose for long periods of time, what can is that our body becomes insulin resistant. Instead of only needing a little bit of insulin to store that energy or direct it to the muscles wherever it needs to go, now we need a lot of it, which basically means that our pancreas has to work overtime. And like you, like me, if we are working around the clock all the time really, really hard, that can start to lead to basically a little bit of burnout, right? A little bit of fatigue. Then it doesn't work so well. So that's when you'd sort of need some outside assistance, right? And that's kind of, in a nutshell, in a very basic version, basically what type 2 diabetes is, where your pancreas doesn't able to produce as much or it's not as effective, and your body needs outside assistance and needs shots of insulin to help decrease the amount of glucose that's in your blood. Type 1 diabetes, slightly different. It's more of a genetic autoimmune thing. My mom's type 1 diabetic, so, it's not necessarily has to do with whatever your metabolic health was. All of a sudden, one day your body can just be like, you know what? I don't want my pancreas to work anymore, which is super fun. If you are type 1, type 2 diabetic, then I want to point you to just an absolute awesome resource of the Diabetes Training Camp. This is not like a paid anything promotion for it. This is just a really cool organization run by endocrinologist Matt Corcoran, where they take people that have diabetes that want to live an active lifestyle. So they go through like the science of how to manage sort of the complications and challenges of diabetes with training, which is really, really cool. But they also go into the mental side, right? They have a mental performance coach come and give talks. It's a really cool camp where they focus on not only, the physical side, the science of it, but also the mental component and the community side, bringing people that are going through something similar together, and it's been really powerful for a lot of people. So I would highly recommend, if you are someone that has diabetes or you know someone that has diabetes that wants to live an active lifestyle, check it out, Diabetes Training Camp. I'll put the link down in the show notes. Really cool organization. Back to non-diabetics. What we want to do from my standpoint is to basically make sure that our metabolic health is as good as it can be. When we do take in carbohydrates, we might see an increase in blood glucose, but then our body's able to pretty efficiently use it or direct it somewhere else, right? And so it's able to do that on its own. We don't need that outside assistance. It's not staying elevated for super long periods of time, or it's not getting really, really high. What is a common issue for endurance athletes is that we sort of over-rely on sort of processed, ultra-processed foods and, gels and bars and things like that. And especially, sports nutrition, sports drinks, it can be really powerful, and like carbs are definitely a performance enhancer, but when you're always taking in a super high amount of carbohydrates, that's where long-term metabolic health can maybe be at a little bit of a detriment. So you want to balance those two things out, and just something to kind of experiment with and keep an eye on. So that's where we'll jump into what my day was. So let's look at what my nutrition was for the day. Here's my log. I'll put it up on the screen. I just wrote down in a notes app of what I ate for the day. This can be, everyone's got a different relationship with food, right? So this can be sometimes a powerful thing to do, and I'd recommend doing it with the help of like Ellen Davis or the Performance Collective, a nutritionist, someone that specializes in sport especially, to sort of have that extra set of eyes going through what you eat in a day, and someone that's going to be able to direct you in maybe a better direction. But I think sometimes we sort of forget, like, we're just going to going through the motions, and we develop these little patterns and habits that we're not super aware of, right? And so taking the time one day out of every so often to really write down, what it is that you are doing, fueling, etc., can make you aware of some of those habits, right? And I actually didn't drink an extra cup of coffee here today, or 2 cups, because I was like, do I really want to write this down? I don't think I really need this cup of coffee. I'm just sort of like going through the motions here of this is what I normally do. So we'll start with, 5:30, woke up because my 1-year-old decided it was time to be awake, which was super fun.
What are you saying?
And started the day kind of with just a flat white, which is like steamed whole milk and espresso, which I definitely needed at 5:30 a.m. And then also a banana and a little bit of water. So I've been trying to eat less processed foods, and bananas are something that come in their own package, which is kind of cool. So then after that, my other son decided to wake up at like 10 minutes later, and we just had a nice little party before 6 a.m.
I made it dirty with fingerprints. Yay!
So at 6:45, I had a half bagel with some cream cheese because I knew I was going to run at some point in the morning. And it was kind of interesting to see, the banana had more of a profound impact. And I think there is also something to be said with like, as you're waking up and just the other hormones in your body, like your blood glucose is affected by more than just your glucose and your insulin levels. And especially diabetics can tell you that. I know, like, for instance, my mom will show up to the start line of a race and, maybe eating a tiny amount that morning, but just that extra, like, even adrenaline can, all of a sudden your blood glucose is spiking because of a totally different hormone in your body. So something to just be aware of, like, these are not the only factors. So I had a little bit of that. I had one more cup of coffee before taking my son to school on the drive there. And then before my run, I had a little bit of kind of a supplement mix. And that's another experiment that I'm running, which will be another video of just like the effects of creatine and beta-alanine and a couple other things in there as well. Like what does that do to my blood work in a month's time? And then what's fascinating is you can see my blood glucose actually increased during my hour run, which your body's moving and using it. And so it was kind of cool to see, like, that was one of the highest periods of the day was when I was running, right? And I didn't have anything really right before that, just a little bit of carbohydrates from the BPN mix. Other than that, it's just like my body saying, hey, I need to be able to use the foods that I've already eaten and maybe a little bit of internal glycogen stores. And that actually elevated my blood glucose. Not super high, but that was kind of cool to see. So then I finished the run, had the rest of my sort of little nutrition shake because I don't really love to drink a ton of creatine before a run and risk going to the bathroom. But then after that, I had this beautiful egg sandwich with pepper jack cheese and sourdough bread. And if you're an egg sandwich kind of person, love to know what cheese you put on your egg sandwich. If it's not pepper jack, I think you're missing out. But that was what we went with this morning. And then I had this smoothie. So smoothies are an interesting thing when it comes to blood glucose and metabolic health because they make it a lot easier. Like your body doesn't have to work as hard to digest it. So I like to use whole milk and was actually just non-fat yogurt. I normally use whole fat yogurt. Just some extra like chia seeds and hemp hearts and oats to try to slow down and add in a little bit more of fat and protein to the mix, which can decrease the rate at which your body is able to put more glucose into your bloodstream. So it's not just the amount of sugar that you're having, but it's also kind of what it's paired with as well. At around 2 o'clock, I started to get a little hungry, want a little snack. So I had an apple, which is actually pretty high in sugar, but apples are, once again, like a non-processed food. And so when you have carbohydrates, it's perfectly good to have carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are fuel, but if you're not like actively going to exercise and at this point of the day, like I wasn't going to do anything else active, then it can be helpful to have extra fiber, right? And something that I could probably do better at is eating more vegetables. So maybe like in the future, having some carrots or God, celery is just nasty, but carrots or something else, some other sort of vegetable here as well. But apples, I believe, also have a little bit of caffeine in them. So since I wasn't going to have that extra cup of coffee, then that helped. There's a slight increase there. And then a little bit later, I had 2 kind of protein Kodiak cake waffles with a little bit of syrup because if they're just plain, then they're not that good. And a little bit of peanut butter because peanut butter is delicious. A lot of people use and kind of think of peanut butter as a source of protein, which it's got like a little bit, but it's mostly a source of fat, which is fine. I mean, again, it kind of blunted the effect on my blood glucose because it was sort of paired with that waffle, which had a little bit of like whey protein in it. So all in all, not like a huge increase there either, which was nice. And then finally, to kind of round out the day, we had just some chili mac and cheese, which was like a Target ready-made meal because we have 2 kids and it was Monday and we just needed to eat something, right? And we don't need to be super fancy with it. Lastly, to finish out the day, I just had a little bit of supplements. I like to take iron supplement and fish oil at night because sometimes they can make my stomach go bleh, and paired it with a curcumin or turmeric or however you say that supplement, which are again going to be in a later video on blood work, but that's kind of what I had at night. And I believe turmeric can sort of be kind of a blood glucose regulator as well. What would be interesting, this was sort of like just a regular training day, a run with some, hill strides in it. I think what would be interesting would be to do this again on like a bigger training day, so like a long run or maybe doing a long bike. So if you want to explore a little bit more about this topic of metabolic health, 2 books that I would highly recommend. One would be Longevity Simplified by Dr. Howard Lux, and then the other one would be Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia. Yep. With all of this stuff, right, kind of interesting to see those numbers and things like that, but ultimately it's doing the things that set yourself up to allow for that consistency, because that consistency is going to be what sets you up for success and just a healthy longevity lifestyle down the line. Until next time, happy training.